Okay.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Surf and Sales podcast. I am Richard Harris, your co-host, your pilot, your flight attendant, all of those things, along with my other co-host, Scott. How are you, my man? We haven't talked in a while.
Yeah, I know. It's been a minute. I was
Yeah.
home for 2 days, then gone for, another 10 days. I've been gone
Yeah,
basically for a month. That's why we
you
haven't talked.
have.
Yeah.
And you haven't done any surfing along the way yet, have you?
No. So there was
No.
no way, there was no waves where I was, but
Yeah. But aren't you going to Portugal?
I am. I'm going surfing in Portugal at the end of September, early October.
Sweet. Which is, it's really a tax write-off for him because he's going to do some surf and sales research to see if we can get surf and sales to Portugal. So
Actually, it's even better than that. I was planning to go there just for a surf trip, and then I
right.
got invited to speak at this conference for a few days. So I'm getting paid to go to Portugal to speak. Got the flight covered and accommodations covered and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm just extending my trip to do my surf trip I was already planning to do. So it's like a
Yeah.
free surf trip.
Memo to self. One more reason to hate Scott.
Gotta work on your maybe we'll talk about deal structures today with our
Yeah.
guest.
Yeah. So without any further ado, let us introduce a new friend of mine, Shawn Rhodes, who is the Chief Sales Sergeant at Bulletproof Selling. So Shawn, tell us a little bit about what that means as we sort of get into this conversation today. Tell people what you do, who you are, what you try to help other people with. And obviously you've got a podcast, so feel free to plug that as well, which is how you and I met. So the mic is yours.
Sure, sir. Well, the chief sales sergeant title, you can take a wild guess and say this guy might have been in the military at some point, and you'd be right in that assumption. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, and they had me doing a very interesting job of running around the battlefield, studying the highest performers that we had across all branches of the military. So I was able to do that in Iraq during my time for a couple of combat tours, and then realized as I got out there in the world and looked at business, I was like, salespeople need this. They need to be able to sell more and serve more, which is one reason I really connect with the message that you two have, because it's all about that. It's all about selling more through serving more. We knew how to do that in the military. But what I found when I began selling as a salesperson, and a lot of salespeople learned the hard way, is that hope enters the picture a little more than it should. And so my work with sales teams all over the world now is to help them remove that hope by serving more and not taking that as a guess or not taking a chance on that. So I get to help salespeople build better systems. And that's something that you and I got to do on my podcast, Richard, over at Bulletproof Selling, which is on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the fun places podcasts can be found. But the love that I have, the passion that I have is taking salespeople, helping them systemize what's working and eliminate what isn't so that they can serve more. And I do that through keynotes, consulting, and all the fun stuff that I'm sure the two of you get to do at conferences as well.
Were you doing this stuff before you went into the military?
Or no, I was not. No, I was.
All of this work came after military stuff.
I was all after the military. Yeah, I was 2 weeks graduated high school when I got into Paris Island. And while I was there, the Twin Towers were hit. So we all thought we were going to have a nice, easy 4 years, get to see the world and all that. And I remember them lining us all up, 1,000 recruits on Paris Island. And they said, raise your hand if you join the Marine Corps for college. And 2 or 3 hands of 1,000 went up in the Marine Corps recruit battalion. And they looked at all those Marines and they said, you three, you screwed up because you're all going to war. And we didn't know if that was a joke. Like, is this a psychological operation? We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have newspapers. We thought maybe this was like a psyop they played on all the recruits. But then we discovered, 9/11 was a thing. So from there, a lot of us went to Afghanistan. More of us went to Iraq. And, 25 years later now, I get to share a little bit about what I learned and help salespeople apply it so that they can be more successful.
When you were there and all this stuff was happening, I can't imagine you were already formulating ideas like, when I get out of here and I'm done with this, I'm going to
I didn't know I was going to go into business. I didn't know I was going to be helping salespeople.
So what I'd love to know is like what that inflection point was, or what that moment was. You're done with, military service and the tours, and you're like, I got an idea. This shit that I learned is applicable in sales and in business. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah. So I knew that my passion was in qualitative analysis, because that's what I was doing in the Marine Corps. And what that means, it's a real fancy, 25-cent word, but it means instead of looking at hard metrics and numbers, it means looking at the softer side of things. So my job in the Marine Corps was to interview people. And through interviewing them, find out what was working really well. And I love doing that. I got to see a different side of the military every single day. Whereas most people in the military, surrounded by the same 5 or 6 people for 4 years or more. I was on a different, with a different unit every day doing a different operation. And I realized for myself, hey, if I'm going to go into business, and that came a little bit later, I was working a couple different jobs before I realized if I'm going to take a chance and open a business, now's the time. Didn't have any kids, just gotten married, very nice, APR on my mortgage. If I'm going to take something that has a high chance of failure, now's the time to do it. So what do I love doing? What doesn't feel like work to me? And it was having those conversations with really high performers and sharing what I learned from them that could benefit everybody else. And I did that for a little while in change management and operational improvement. But I got to be honest with you, and you two probably see this at your conferences. If you tell salespeople that they can succeed at a higher level by doing just a few simple things, the notepads come out, the pens come out. They're willing to give it a try before they call BS on it, but they're willing to give it a try. And that's different than every other vertical in business where they look at you and they say, you haven't been managing a warehouse for 37 years like I have. What am I going to learn from you? You don't get that out of salespeople because they know if one or two small things sometimes make the difference between that 7-figure year and that 8-figure year.
Yeah, we're inherently curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I've got so many questions. First of all, thank you for your service. We appreciate it. I know, and thank you to your family who, they had to make some sacrifices with you being gone and not knowing what's going on. I got so many questions for you. I think my first question is, what did you notice, assuming you're allowed to share, what did you notice between the peak performance of soldiers or people in the service that's similar to the same level of peak performance in business people, salespeople, and I would assume somewhat humanity in general, right? Like it's not just that, but specific to the sales side. What are the commonalities you saw in peak performance?
It was a fanatical dedication and a passion for improvement across both sides.
And what does that mean, though? Because that sounds really good, but like,
All right, so
what does fanatical look like, and what does sort of mediocre look like?
Yeah. Okay. So in the military, they don't allow mediocrity because mediocrity gets people killed. And if you're on a high performing team, so you think like frontline combat operations, if I get lazy, it usually doesn't mean that I don't go home. It means you don't go home as my teammate. So I've got to be focused 100% of the time, 24 hours a day, even when I'm sleeping often enough, which is really hard to do, believe it or not. Very exhausting to not ever be able to sleep where you can't wake up in an instant and be engaged in action. And this is what we were dealing with on the front lines of Iraq in the early part of the war. So in the military, we have processes and systems to make sure that after every mission, everybody on the team gets better. And we have to do that because we're facing a very fluid and dynamic enemy where they're paying attention to what we're doing. They're with their cell phones, and even back in 2003, they had the technology to have very small cameras on their cell phones to take video. So they're watching how we're going down a street on a patrol. They're watching how we're clearing a house, and they're sharing that with their intelligence community because if they can find a chink in our armor, they're going to exploit it. So after every engagement, after every contact, we have to debrief that in the Marine Corps and in the military in general to say what happened, why did it happen, and if we had to do it again, how would we want to make it different so that we avoid that situation in the future? And we also do it with success. So if we send 30 Marines into a building and only expect 15 to walk back out, and all 30 of them do, in urban combat, it's about a 50% loss rate with untrained people, which is really high. That's why we don't like to fight in urban situations. But if they're that successful, 100% survival rate, they send a person like me in to say, how did it happen? Why did it happen? How do we make sure that everybody else on the battlefield gets a taste of the magic that you all figured out naturally? And usually it's because they do something systematically that everybody else can learn from. So we have that process after every mission to improve everybody on the team. When I go into a high-performing sales team, very few times do they have that process in place, which is usually why they're bringing me in. But what we do notice about the highest performing salespeople is that after every deal, they take the time either on paper or in their head to ask the question, if I had to run that through again, what would I have done differently? Would I have been in contact sooner? Would I have sent that email that I waited 6 months to send with that piece of information? What I sent that in the first week. What could I do to make my next sale more successful? And they integrate that among themselves and they use it. Where it's shared probably most often inside of a sales team is in those informal conversations around the water cooler. And with the help of gentlemen like you, I'm sure you have processes to help salespeople get that information out of their heads so that the team can benefit. But in a high-performing sales team, people are doing that on an individual level, which is why on a sales team, you usually see, maybe 5 or 10% of the team selling 5 or 10x what everybody else is selling. It's because they've taken the time to integrate in their head what went right, what went wrong, what are they going to do differently on their next call and on their next deal. When that begins to be shared across the team as a process, you see drastic and vast improvement very quickly, because suddenly that lowest performing person that just never took the time to learn what went wrong on that last deal, they're just like, shucks, lost that one, on to the next call. Yeah. When they take the time to learn and they do something differently and you do something differently and everybody else on the team benefits from my loss, they don't have to make the same mistake I did. Wow, the results that begin to happen there, it's incredible.
When I first started selling, I used to walk up to somebody who closed a deal and just say, hey, how did that happen? What did you do?
How did it happen?
Like, what did you do? Right. And even when I was number one in the company, Richard or Shawn would close a deal. I'd walk up, I'd high five you guys, and I'd be like, yeah, what did you write? Like, why did that happen? And I wasn't really expecting like tons of new information or something to shock me. Mm-hmm. Right. But every now and then I'd hear some tip or some strategy and I'm like, shit, that's a good one. Like,
I should use that. Yeah.
Integrate that or whatever. Right. But I was constantly trying to learn what was working for people, to incorporate that into my own kind of, process. And I think that level of curiosity is lacking in people who are at the bottom of the leaderboard.
Absolutely. And so, my work in companies in large part is to not leave that process to chance. It's to make sure that, and I'm sure you all have done this, where everybody's, getting that big team huddle together. Bob, you just closed, that $50 million deal you've been working on for 8 months. Everybody give a hand to Bob. And then the sales leader will usually ask, Bob, what did you get out of that deal? And Bob will say something very generic, usually.
Yeah, it'll be total fluff.
Total fluff.
I don't know.
I just kept calling, man. I kept calling until they picked up the phone. Well, if I'm there, if somebody's, and I get to do this for a living, right? So usually I am there in the rooms I'm allowed into. I say, Bob, that's a great answer. Walk me through that like you're training me to do it in front of the whole team. And we don't make it an hour-long process, but in 5 minutes, Bob will share something that everybody else could benefit from and actually use if you take the time to go a level deeper.
That's great. How did you talked about it a little bit ago, but you came out of the military, you sort of had this pivotal moment where you're like, oh, I can see where this translates. And there is a lot of time where people are like, but Shawn, you've never actually carried a bag and sold. Right. Now, granted, you might have been able to walk in and they're like, okay, this guy's a Marine. We're not fucking with them, so we can't call him out on that.
Right.
So maybe that air sort of helped you break down that wall. Is that what happened? Like, how did you get people to believe in you when you hadn't done the sales job? And I'm not saying sales is harder than being in a Marine or in a war. I just know how salespeople think. Like, and I'm sure you've run into it. So I'm just curious, like, what was
there were kind of two ways this happened. Normally I'd be brought into a consulting engagement in the early days for operational performance, right? So they'd go in and they'd say, for our people that are working the line, or they're working in the warehouse, or they're packing the boxes to get loaded on the trucks to go out to our customers, we want you to make that more efficient. And my first book actually was about creating a pivot point. You use that word. How do we create a pivot point in our operational process? What I began to really realize very quickly, and they did too, they say, Shawn, it was great that you helped us with the efficiency in the warehouse. I need you to bring that over to our sales team, because we realize we can make our operations as efficient as we want to, but if they're not packing any boxes because we can't sell any of our stuff, it doesn't matter how fast and efficient they are or how much they improve. And then usually they would say, Shawn, we really want you to teach them to sell the way that you sold to us. And that comes from me implementing what I teach. Right. So it's not entering a call unless I have objectives, mission objectives. It's not getting them into a conversation with a high-level decision maker unless I've taken the time to do a threat assessment. not a SWOT analysis, but taking the time to really look at what could go wrong on this call and what resources am I lining up to prevent that from ever even entering the conversation. What am I doing after the call to get better? So teaching them to sell the way that I had sold to these organizations. So that was kind of, path one. Path two was, in order to gain the conversations, I had to be fanatical about tracking and using quantitative analysis, if you will, to track my calls. To say, I've never sold a $300,000 piece of construction equipment, and John Deere is one of my clients, so they wouldn't mind me sharing this story. Never sold a big piece of equipment like that. But what I have done,
me either.
Is track those, me either, right? And none of us have, probably, unless you're in that very slim vertical of sales. But what I can do is share what we've learned across 30,000 sales calls going over hundreds of industries. And that's just what I had to do to sell consulting. I can share what we learned over that is going to benefit your people. It's going to shorten their sales cycle. It's going to allow them to provide more value sooner, so that whether they sell that equipment today or next season, they're going to have a customer that's going to want to hear from them.
I'm going to go back to this thing you're talking about all the interviews that you've done. Sure. And your job is to interview everybody.
Yeah, even on the podcast, Richard has experienced it.
Yeah. By the way, Scott, he's got a really fun and unique way. Like I'm sure you'll get on his podcast now, but he's got a very unique way that he does it. So,
well, I'm not going to ask him his process for that part yet, because I don't want to spoil it. But what I was going to ask was, what's the most memorable interview that you've had?
Ooh, that's a good question. Think of the hundreds that I've been able to conduct. The most memorable interview might have been with General James Mattis.
And so what makes it so memorable? What's like a good
story? So there's a kind of fun story that I'll try to tell as quickly as I can here. In 2004 in Fallujah, they weren't allowing any patrols into the city. They would fight us back every time. 300,000 people, almost all of them were armed. So they didn't want any part of what the military was doing. But it was our job to bring them humanitarian supplies. So we weren't fulfilling our mission. So what General Mattis did, because that was his area of operations, he was in charge of it, he shut off the water and the power to a city of 300,000 people in the middle of the desert in the summer. And that got their attention. So they said, all right, we're willing to negotiate a ceasefire. We won't shoot at every vehicle you send into the city, but you have to come, General Mattis, with a very small contingent of vehicles to the middle of our city with no support. And if y'all ever saw that movie Black Hawk Down, that's kind of what we were expecting. I didn't know it at the time, but they called that mission the Dead Man's Patrol, because they didn't expect any of us to walk back out of it. But on the off chance that they survived, they needed somebody to be there to record it. So they said, Corporal Rhodes, get on a vehicle. So five or six Humvees went into a city of 300,000 very angry insurgents, where we were pretty sure they were just going to take General Mattis hostage and, parade him on TV and kill the rest of us. And I was able to sit in a room with General Mattis and a bunch of insurgents, Iraqi terrorists at the time, and one Green Beret Army interpreter. And it was just the three of us Marines in that room, waiting for the signal that they were going to capture General Mattis. And it was my job to interview, capture what was going on, and if necessary, defend the general's life with my one rifle against 30 people. Not a shot was fired in that entire interview and on that mission. We made it back out of Fallujah safely. But just that whole experience, being able to sit in the room with somebody as famous as General Mattis, and he was famous back then too, before he was the Secretary of Defense, and then be able to even recount that with him. He and I shared a stage this past year in Las Vegas, and 20 years later, he remembered me. So that was pretty cool.
Wow. That's really
impressive. Cool. So I'm going to ask you, what do you do with the fear that's inside you in a situation like that? Because in sales, we always run into fear, right? Oh, yeah. And, certainly you put me in perspective of like, I got nothing to be afraid of.
Compared to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't mean that fear is not real for people, right? And, and I'm thinking about the sales rep who's, their job could be on the line for this one last deal. They've got a family, they've got a kid in college. So the pressure is real, right? Yeah. It's real pressure. What have you learned in that kind of situation to help you breathe through it, for lack of a better phrase, right? Like to sort of go, okay, that fear is real, but I still got to get this job done. Any advice for something like that?
Sure. So in the military, they would answer that question with know what the next step is. So where fear can paralyze you, and I saw this happen on the battlefield, even after all of our training, the first time that troops are under contact, under fire, the first response is usually to freeze, even after the hundreds of hours of training they have to ideally teach them not to freeze. Still they freeze because they forget what is the next thing I'm supposed to be doing. So in sales, the way that I teach people to go into a sales call is to have the next step planned out already. So instead of allowing your prospect to put the leash on your neck and lead you around, you don't have to do that to them, but know that, here are the things that I need to achieve on this call to be successful. And assuming I get that conversation, and this isn't rolling to voicemail, you and I are speaking with one another now, human to human. Here are the things that I need to achieve. And I'm going to do that in a way that serves you at the highest level I can possibly serve you at. But I'm not going to let this call end until I at least get a couple of those items down. And what that allows me to do as a salesperson, what it allows another salesperson to do that's using a system like that, is to not get on a call and be like, oh, I finally got into a conversation with this person I've been trying to get in contact with for 6 months. What do I say now? And that happens a lot. There's a story I share from the stage. I've managed to get a conversation in the early days of my business with Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx. And I got that conversation because he was a former Marine. He was on the front lines in Vietnam. I didn't know what to do with that, though. I didn't have a next step. So I blew that opportunity where he would have been happy to throw me a piece of business, I'm sure, but I didn't know what to do. And so to prevent myself from, that situation recurring, mapping out what are the things I need to learn in this conversation to be successful. So that's part one of that answer. Part two of how you overcome fear in a situation like a sales call, a really high value opportunity, is if this thing tanks, which is always, you never can guarantee a sale. There's many things that you can line up ahead of time. If it tanks, what am I going to learn from it so that I never face that problem again? And that means debriefing the call, right? It means taking a look at, if I had to run those three, those 3 meetings again, or that 1 meeting again, what am I going to do differently in the future so that I'm never shut down on budget? I'm never shut down on, have you ever dealt with a client like me in the past in my industry? Whatever response they gave me that killed that deal, it's never going to happen again. And I'm going to do the research. I'm going to talk to my teammates. I'm going to talk to my sales manager, whoever I need to speak with, to build that process for myself so that that never stops me. And that gives me just a little bit more confidence so that on my next deal, that's one less thing I have to worry about. You do that often enough, once a week, once a month, think of how much better you are that you never have to worry about those things happening to you. And in sales, we're really only stopped by the same, let's say 5 to 7 objections.
Yeah.
If you wrap those 5 to 7 objections up, you're golden.
Yeah. Interesting. So, all right, I got to ask this question, and then I know we got to sort of move to wrap up where you can ask us a question. How the heck did you get in front of John Deere, Fred Smith at FedEx? Like, this is the dream.
When he first started his business, he said he first
right, exactly, right? Like, was it? And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you answer it. But okay, how did you do it?
So I asked myself, what are the ways that I can get into conversations with people that make decisions in the ways that allow me to bypass as many of the gatekeepers that people normally hit as possible? And for me, having a veteran background, right, being in the military, there's trust built already with other veterans. And so I just went looking. I said, who are the CEOs of the top companies in America that happen to be military veterans? And Fred Smith was one of the people at the top of that list as far as company size. And there are a few others. So it's to then say, all right, here's what I'm about, right? I'm not trying to, sell you 100 widgets, because I don't know if you need 100 widgets. I'm connecting with you because we have this shared experience, this shared background, and any salesperson could do this. You don't have to be in the military to make this work. But if you can reach out on LinkedIn and find those people that went to your university, grew up in your hometown, part of the same hobbies that you're a part of, figure out what other ways you can build rapport right out of the gate, so that when you enter this conversation, there's already a bit of a relationship established, a bit of trust that's been built that you then have to verify and improve upon, but you're not starting from scratch. So that's how I got that conversation with Fred Smith. It took me, much less than 6 months, and I didn't have to bounce through too many gatekeepers before I was able to have that conversation. Again, in hindsight, really wish I'd have had a plan. Didn't. that mission tanked, you could say. And with John Deere, it was taking the opportunity to serve more that got me that client. And how that worked out was, I get to speak at a lot of professional conferences. If any of your listeners are part of a professional association where there are salespeople in the audience or executives that are responsible for sales as one of their KPIs, those are the types of conferences I speak at. And I took a lower paying gig because I knew I'd be in front of people that needed to hear this message. And it was one of those situations, and I'm sure you all have experienced this in your careers. You're prepared for 300 people to be in a room, and there's 5 people.
Ooh.
Which happens, right? I can't do the promotion, entirely by myself on an event. Maybe there's a cocktail hour happening, so those 5 people are in the room, and you still have to perform like there's 300 people, 300, Fortune 100 CEOs in there, because that's what you commit to, right? I'm not going to half-ass my skill set or my passion or my gift just because there's only 5 people in the room. So I got up there and I performed as well as I would have in front of 3,000 people. And, people are filing out of the room to go off to the cocktail hour that they still have a couple minutes left to get a free drink on. And the guy walks up to me and he says, "I'm the training director for John Deere's construction and forestry division. I need that message for my 1,200 salespeople." I said, "Roger that, let's make it happen." So that's how that works.
Wow. Good for you.
That's awesome. So, well, we're at that end where we, sort of love to flip it to you to see, is there a question you'd like to ask us? This has been fascinating, by the way, like really, like so many good stories. I could go for hours talking to you. So, but is there something you'd like to ask us? We're happy to answer questions for you.
Yeah. When you guys are in front of a sales team, do you find yourselves leaning more toward the qualitative or the quantitative? Are you looking for metrics first, or are you looking for what's happening with the people to lead you to where you could be of service to them?
So for me, there's when I'm talking to the organization like you, I certainly want to understand what their baseline looks like, right? But I don't come in to train to drive we're going to do this and this and this, and it's going to drive this. It's much more of the soft skills, as I'm interpreting your question, right? Like teaching people how to earn the right to ask questions, teaching them what are the right kinds of questions, the right way to ask the questions, how to be bold but not obnoxious in those moments of the objections, right? How to have that conversation professionally, which then, when done, adjusts the metrics, right? Because that's the part that changes the metrics. It's not, I'm not opposed to you do have to make more effort, right? You have to put in some more calls than ever, but than you used to, but you certainly, it does matter what happens when they pick up the phone, right? And so I try to focus on that because I can't control who picks up the phone.
Right.
I can't predict that, right? Any number around that level of open rates or call connects, that's all historical, and you don't know what that's like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow is Wednesday and today is Tuesday. So you don't know. So it's how do we make, my goal is, in the way I do things, is how do we make sure that when something happens, they have the best opportunity to make something happen. So
love
it was a long answer, but
that's good.
I'm trying to think of how I actually would respond, because in what context are you thinking of?
Yeah, so I'm the CRO of a company, and I say, listen, Scott, I've caught you on the podcast, love the message, love the ideas. Come in and tell me how you can make my team better. And that may be all the information you're given. I've talked to CROs, and that's all they'll turn over. So if you're given an open-ended request like that, are you looking at numbers or are you looking at people? And there's no wrong answer, by the way, because I've done both and they've both been successful. I just want your perspective.
I think the first thing I'm looking at is the numbers.
Okay.
They say, I need your help. I'm like, okay, well, what are we looking at?
Yeah.
So I like to look at data, I guess, first, which leads me to ask questions to as I dive into that to figure out what's going on. And then I would go to the people and understand like why maybe this is happening, what's their perspective on things. And then I can take that back. So I think that's if I'm understanding your question the right way, that's the order of operations.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily what I believe is the most important piece of it. I actually think the most important piece is how the people on that sales team feel.
Yeah.
How prepared they are and how well coached and trained and rehearsed and practiced they are and that kind of stuff. But I think I start with, let me look at the numbers. You tell me that you're not doing good. Show me where. Then let me talk to people. So I think it would be, for me, starting with quantitative.
Okay. And that's fun. So you've got, each of you is an expert in one of those areas. So put together, that's a powerful mix. I see why you guys work well together.
Yeah.
Well,
one might think.
Yeah. I am the math guy compared to Richard, right, Richard?
Yeah. You're the math and the grammar guy. He is my Grammarly.
Well, we really appreciate you spending some time with us, man. Sorry, we only have, this short period of time, but it's been super educational, informational. Shawn Rhodes, founder of Bulletproof Selling.
Yep.
Right. Tell everybody about, how they can reach out to you, stay in touch, learn more about what you're up to. And
for sure.
Stuff.
So if you go over to battlefieldselling.com, we can teach you to be bulletproof. So battlefieldselling.com, you'll find the resources there, the interviews that we've been able to conduct with very smart people like the folks on this show. You'll be able to find the book. We've got it on Amazon, Bulletproof Selling, Kindle, Audible, all the fun places. And then the podcast, Bulletproof Selling, is available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And what you'll notice, and Richard, you alluded to this, I wanted to build very tactical, useful tools for salespeople instead of just to have great strategic conversations, which are valuable as well. But I wanted salespeople to walk away from my show with things that they could immediately implement. So every one of our 150 plus shows, we build a new sales system that you can take and use. So that's something that Richard helped us out with as well. Every guest does. So make sure you check that out on iTunes.
That's pretty cool.
That's super cool. Shawn, so good to see you again. Thank you for giving us your time and sharing all this. And again, just really appreciate, all the stuff you've shared with us today.
Right on. All right. We'll see everybody next time on the Surf and Sales podcast.
See ya.